After almost 20 years, Natalee Holloway's killer finally confessed. I'm Neama Rahmani, a real lawyer and former federal prosecutor, and I'm going to tell you how we got here. Most of us, including Natalee's family, suspected Joran Sloot to be the killer. But for years, he evaded justice until he pled guilty in a federal courtroom last week. Now, he didn't plead guilty to murder, and I'll explain why. But he did plead to extortion and wire fraud. And as part of that sentence, he admitted for the first time the gruesome details of Natalee's death. Sloot bashed her head in after Natalee refused his advances. And then he dragged her into the ocean where he left her body. It still hasn't been found. The reason he confessed is that he tried to extort and defraud Natalee's family. He said if they paid him $250,000, he would give them information as to where her body was. Now, that information was incorrect. He said that she was buried under a building, and it turns out that she wasn't there. But the family agreed to pay $25,000 up front and an extra $225,000 when Natalee's remains were found. The reason Sloot can never be held accountable for the murder is that it happened in Aruba. And the statute of limitations for murder in Aruba is only 12 years. So he can't be prosecuted there for Natalee's death. And even though the United States has a foreign murder statute that only applies to US nationals killing other US nationals abroad, and even though Natalee was a US national, Sloot, of course, was not. So that statute doesn't apply. But he can, and he was charged with trying to defraud the Halloway family. And he was indicted on that years ago. But the reason he wasn't extradited to the United States right away is because Sloot was doing time in Peru for killing another woman under similar circumstances who rejected his advances. And he's doing a 28-year prison sentence in Peru. Now, as part of what some people think is a prisoner exchange, Peru agreed to extradite Sloot to the United States recently to stand trial for these fraud charges, with the understanding that he would go back to Peru to finish his murder sentence before he served any time in the United States. But in Peru, not only is he doing 28 years for murder, he's doing an additional 18 years for trafficking cocaine into prison. Now, there's an interesting part of Peruvian law that says you can only do 35 years for a non-life case. So essentially, Sloot is doing a 35-year prison sentence in Peru. Now, as part of this deal, he negotiated with prosecutors here in the United States. He agreed to plead guilty and tell them everything about Natalee's disappearance and death. He did so under a proffer, which means that essentially anything he says can't be used against him. So that's another reason why he can't be prosecuted in the United States for Natalee's murder. But prosecutors agreed to this deal to give the Halloway family some closure. There's no way he could be charged with a murder, so this was the next best thing. So in exchange for coming clean, Sloot got concurrent time. So what does that mean? The judge maxed him out, which means that the judge imposed the maximum sentence allowed under US law, which is 20 years for wire fraud. But the judge agreed to run it concurrently. That means at the same time as any time that he's doing in Peru. So because we know that he's serving time on that combined 35-year prison sentence in Peru, unless Sloot is released from prison early for some reason, he's never going to do any time in the United States. And in fact, as part of his sentence, he was deported back to Peru and barred from ever returning to the United States. So essentially, in exchange for coming clean, Sloot got a deal where he did not get any additional prison time. Prosecutors had limited options. They could have asked for consecutive, they could have asked for time after. But because the Halloway family wanted answers, and because the only way they could get those answers was if Sloot came clean, They agreed to the deal. So this closes the chapter on one of the sadder cases in U.S. history. Natalee Holloway was missing for 18 years. The family suspected Joran van der Sloot to be his murderer, but they never had the clarity and the certainty that they have now. Van der Sloot will go back to Peru, he'll serve his time, he'll never come back to the United States, and now we know that he was the real killer. What do you think about the Halloway case and Van der Sloot's plea deal? Let me know in the comments below, and make sure to like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications.